Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live. I really appreciate everybody for joining us today. We've got a really good session. I can't wait to share with you the journey, the story that we're going to go through today. And I'm going to come to that in a second. Before I do, I just wanted to go through a little bit of logistics. So if you've never been to an AOP Live session before, they're all about, it's all question based, there's no slides, so it's interview format. So I'll be posing a number of questions to our guests today. And a lot of those questions we've got from you. As you went through the registration process, you'll have noticed that we asked you and invited you to submit questions. So we either took some of those questions directly and put them into today's show, or we really built where we got a lot of similar questions. We built those into some of the question sets that we have. I would also invite you to ask questions throughout the day. It's relatively easy to do that. All you need to do is use the chat dialog box that you see on the control panel here in GoToWebinar, or ask them in the questions area. And my colleague Kelly Barner, who is actually on the video right now, will be keeping an eye on any questions as they come in. And will really be your voice as we go through the conversation. So I'll break a couple of times throughout today to come to Kelly to ask any questions that you have for Mike and Cathie. So first of all, thank you very much, Kelly, for helping with the questions today.
Not a problem. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I will see you in the chat.
All right, so Kelly's going to go off camera so that you don't have to watch Kelly typing away with all of you. So today's topic, we're going to talk about taking a bold and focused approach to transforming indirect P2P, procure to pay, at Clorox. We're going to hear about the Clorox company's transformation journey, including what helped them to be successful and the critical infrastructure investments that they made. We have two guests who are joining us today. I'm joined by Cathie Thrasher. Cathie is a senior procurement manager at the Clorox company, and Mike Caldron. Mike is a senior group manager at WNS Denali. So without further ado, we're going to get to know our guests a little bit more. And Cathie, I'm going to come to you first. And your background, I think, was part of why you were selected to lead this transformation journey that we're going to talk about at Clorox. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your professional journey.
Sure, yes, and thank you for having me. So I have been doing corporate procurement for over 35 years. And various industries, including retail, financial, and now consumer products. And back in 2001, at a previous company, I led the effort to implement an on-prem e-procurement solution, and it was considered bleeding edge at the time. Like, suppliers were not even used to getting anything electronically. Right. So I worked with an amazing project team at the time, and I learned a lot. And now I've been at Clorox for about 10 and a half years, and we made several attempts at getting an e-procurement project, started and off the ground. And finally, stars aligned, we got it approved. And so they asked me to join because of my knowledge with e-procurement systems, but also my experience as a procurement professional. So right. I was asked to join the team as kind of both roles, that procurement expert and then the subject matter expert. So we began the journey to implement it.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that journey in a second, but all right. I want to not have Mike wait any longer. So Mike, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your background as well and how you came to be involved in Clorox's journey.
Yeah. Thanks again for having us. Really pleased to be here today, and have been, really fortunate to work with Cathie for several years, supporting the Clorox organization. I've got about 15 years experience working in the procurement industry. I've been at WNS Denali now for just over four and a half years, and have worked in lots of different industries in my 15 years of procurement experience. And I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being at WNS Denali, and certainly working with Clorox, is that they have a tremendous culture, and it's just been a fabulous place to work and to be a part of. I've been part of the team from WNS Denali that supported Clorox over the last 4 years for their indirect procurement group, and this project came along that Clorox was tackling. And so, my involvement was really to support Cathie from the WNS Denali side of things, and how can we help them to implement a team to really do procurement operations well. So it's been a pleasure to do this, and thanks again for having us.
You're welcome. And so let's get into that journey. And first of all, Cathie, I think we talked a little bit about culture just during the introductions. And at Clorox, you have an Ignite strategy to really encourage anyone to lead with their head, their heart, and their guts. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this guiding philosophy and how that came to affect your transformation journey.
Sure. So people are pretty familiar with Clorox, especially after the pandemic, or I guess we're still in it, but that. So, our purpose here at Clorox is really to champion people to be well and thrive. And we do this by living our values. And, and one of the ones that just sticks with me is, always do the right thing. But we always put people at the center as well. And so how we show up to win is this head, heart, and guts that you referenced. And it's really about, it's different for all of us, but what it means is to know where we're going and, be determined to get there and then help each other to get there. So that's really how we have, we put all the pieces together to live our purpose at Clorox.
Now, before I go into kind of what that transformation looked like, and as you were setting up what you were setting out to achieve, we had a question from Leonor at the beginning. So we got the question as part of the registration process, and this is more from a how do you manage on a personal level when you're coming into a project like this? And the question was, how could you step away from your normal day-to-day responsibilities to focus on transformation? And what are some of the keys for you to actually not be pulled back into your previous responsibilities, create the space that allows you to focus on driving transformation?
Right. So as Mike mentioned, we have partnered with Denali for a number of years now, and we've always acted as one team. And so all of our stakeholders and end users are used to working directly with our Denali partners. And so when I was asked to step into the project role, we went to Mike and we said, okay, our lead, my primary counterpart, has to kind of step up and play a more active role. And so he was awesome, and he was really key to me being able to stay in the role. I still attended biweekly meetings to stay abreast of what was going on in the categories that I manage. I still attended key supplier stakeholder, QBRs and meetings like that. But really was able to step away because of our partnership with Denali, and particularly a very strong partner that supports me in my categories.
Now, could you speak a little bit to kind of where you started on this journey? As what were the things that you were looking to achieve, and really, I want to set up for the viewers kind of what journey we're going to take them on. And what things were like perhaps before you started to look at going on a journey to transform P2P.
So believe it or not, Clorox had no purchasing system at all for indirect spend, and the indirect spend accounts for half of our overall spend as a company. And we had been trying to do it for, like I mentioned at the beginning, for many, many years, taking a run at it. But it takes a big team, a lot of dedication, a lot of money. And so when I said the stars aligned, it really had to do with being able to process invoices faster, having visibility to the spend, because we didn't even know until the invoices came in what was committed. So it was that mindset shift that really was able to get it off the ground and get all the right focus on this huge transformation effort.
Right. And Mike, I want to come to you. So as the Clorox team started on that journey, what were some of the kind of tough choices or important choices that they had to make that were really critical then to the direction that the transformation journey went?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting and a real privilege to see and to be a little bit a part of, Clorox really knows their own employees really well. They have a tremendous culture, and they understand what it's going to take to sort of implement something like this. As you know, in indirect spend, different than direct spend. Indirect spend, the stakeholders have the budget, they're the deciders, they're the ones that sort of drive things. There's a huge amount of change management and getting them on board that has to happen. Clorox knows their culture, but they also then think very wisely about, okay, how do we make sure that we do something that's in keeping with our culture?
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about the timing of things, thinking about priorities, thinking about the way in which you're going to roll something out is pivotal to success of this, and it's something that aligns sort of naturally with Clorox and who they are and how they do things.
Now, when you set things up, Cathie, how did you take that into account? Were you doing focus groups, bringing in folks, some external stakeholders, so you could get the voice of folks across the Clorox organization? Or is the culture so embedded within the organization that everyone's so familiar with it, you kind of had a really good starting point?
A little bit of both. So when we were trying to identify an implementation partner, we also talked to a lot of different companies that had already gone through the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so the message that came across really loud and clear is communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yeah.
And it could not be overstated or understated. And so we realized this was a huge, huge change. So we did do, as part of the kind of design, we went out to all of our end users and interviewed them and tried to find out what was important in their challenges, because we wanted to address their challenges. And then we would go back and continue to go back to them and give feedback, give updates, what's changing. We would bounce things off of them. Would this work? Would that work? That kind of thing. So that is critical. I think it was not only just the communication, but change management and bringing everybody along for the journey. But like what Mike was saying, as far as the culture, most people, change is never easy, but people they knew it was big. They knew they had to get on board. So we had some early champions at the beginning, and that was really critical to success as well.
And I think it's really important to add, you're doing this change in the middle of a pandemic where, from an organizational perspective,
yes,
you're a critical worker. Your organization is critical because of the products that you make.
Yes. Yeah, that was, the entire project, because we selected our implementation partner in December of 2019, and we kicked off right as the pandemic hit. So the entire project, all the way from design to go live, was done without a single in-person meeting.
So as you're thinking about the design, how did you look to balance implementation of technology with perhaps changes that were needed on process and workflow? Did you start in one place, for example, process and workflow, and then back technology into it? Or how did you kind of manage that, those not necessarily competing elements, but complementary elements?
Well, we had to get our IT and technology folks on board right at the beginning as we chose the tool and really understand what the implications of that choice was. And we did it at the same time. It was super, super intense for like a year with the design stuff. But there was a lot of meetings that was just IT, and then there was meetings that were just business. And then we would have to bounce the two off of each other, because I think one of the saving graces was that we didn't have an existing system. So so people weren't used to, they were used to doing it manually. So we didn't have to change like a technology solution into another technology solution. So we were able to adopt, let's go as out of the box as we can. We don't want to customize. And that was, I think, very helpful.
So you were able to ultimately select a technology and then build process and workflow around the capabilities of the technology.
Exactly. You said it better than I did.
Mike, I just didn't know if you had anything else to add from what you observed on the ground as well of that decision-making process.
Yeah, the only other thing I think is, again, sort of making choices that sort of go along with where the company is. And given that the pandemic was going on and that, there's some challenges around doing an implementation of anything large like this, making wise choices about should new policies and procedures be put in place right away? in addition to a new tool, or do you sort of mimic what you have and then sort of, go slowly with things? So thinking about, like a spot buy framework, is that something that should get rolled out right away if you don't have it because the tool can support it? Or are you thinking about, gosh, the pace of change for that might be a bit much that the organization to bear. And so being really sensitive and wise about understanding, again, I think that comes back to understanding Clorox's culture and the fact that they knew that and they made those wise choices that were right for them. Some people might say, well, that's not bleeding edge, that's not sort of sort of best of breed and best in class, but it's right for Clorox. And I think that's one thing that organizations really need to pay attention to is, they could have gone for everything, but that would have been unwise and probably led to some amount of failure and frustration on part of the business. So they steered away from that and had a very successful implementation.
I think that's something that's really important that I want to just highlight about. You see all these designs of best in class, but I struggle when, you're looking for a best-in-class solution, but what you just said, it's best in what meets your individual organizational demand and need. And that's very different from one organization to the next organization. And oftentimes we set ourselves up for failure by having a notion of what best-in-class is and pursuing that when it's not actually what the organization needs. So actually taking that into account, I think, is where organizations struggle and fail sometimes is when they don't necessarily take that into account and just try and go to that staged approach and say, look, this is great, technology is great, but I don't actually need to do that within my business, and maybe I'm not even going to have any success in doing it if I try and push that. Now, Cathie, from a talent and staffing perspective, as you're looking then at, you're bringing in new technology, you are looking at redesigning processes, redesigning workflows, what kind of implications did that have from a staffing perspective and from a talent perspective as well for your team?
Well, from the beginning, we had identified some of the gaps and the needs. And as I said, we had nothing before. So we knew that we were going to need, for example, an admin. And we didn't have anybody, so we looked at skills, et cetera, and found someone internally. But the biggest gap was like, how are we going to support purchase orders? Because we didn't have any. How are we going to help people create purchase orders or troubleshoot invoices or anything like that? So we really tried to, and again, with our implementation partner, but also some of those interviews that we did with other companies, what were the skills we needed? What were the roles we needed? So we designed kind of the roles first, and then we looked to Denali and partnering with them and built an entirely new team to support this. And we had to have kind of a primary person and a backup person because you never know if someone's going to be out. And there were so many things. It wasn't just the procurement system, but like, how do we check if there's a contract? So they had to be able to look into our contracting system, et cetera. So I think what we did is started with kind of that org chart, what we needed and the skills that were needed, and then went out and tried to get the people in place to fill those. And then, oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Cathie.
I was going to say another key element of that is we already had partnered with Denali for our sourcing and our RFP and all that. So we had to make sure that these two teams could work together and that there was a seamless handoff between the two. And so Mike's role was kind of pivotal to make sure that that communication happened and that would be seamless to our end users.
Yeah. If I could just jump in, one thing, Cathie, that you're really close to this, and one thing that I saw is that because of the culture of Clorox and the nature of how they intake information and how you interact with each other, we had to think about that as we were bringing people onto our team to support you. So we tried to find folks that could in some way work with or even match the culture within Clorox, which is highly collaborative and a lot of discussion and sometimes a lot of high touch and that sort of thing. And they're very different than other organizations, but we wanted to make sure, and it was important for the success of the program, that people sort of match that and they fit well. And I think where we are now, we have a really, really strong group of people who are very good technically, and can do the work that's necessary, but they also are very good interacting with the folks within Clorox, which I think makes the program that much more successful.
So, Mike, as you're looking at from an operating model perspective, then the folks who are supporting from a procurement operations perspective, what's their roles? Like, what are the folks that you brought into the team, or collectively that Clorox brought into the team? What are those folks actually doing?
Yeah, so we have a couple of people that are handling reviewing the PRs, the requests that come in, and reviewing them for whatever they might need in order to be converted over to purchase orders. And oftentimes that's really high touch. That's going back to stakeholders and understanding, what is it that you need? What, your account code wasn't correct. Can I help you sort of navigate through some of those things? And sometimes people are just unsure of what they need, and so we're going in with kind of an open mind of how do we help. So there's people that are doing that kind of work. As Cathie mentioned, there's a lot of contract work as well, contract handling work. And so we're getting information so that we can route and store contracts in their contract repository. But we're also doing an awful lot right now of supplier enablement into the system still. So there was a large group of suppliers that were enabled initially, and we're continuing to sort of work the tail on that effort. And so that's its own work stream of reaching out to suppliers and getting them onto the tool. There's one other, what is it, Cathie? Help desk, just helping people in general answer questions. And so, again, one of the great things that Clorox did is have something like office hours. And so we had people that were staffing office hours along with Clorox folks to answer questions and help them through any issues that they may have. So that's really rounds out the team that we have on the proc ops side of things.
And so what's the broader operating model then that Clorox designed for themselves at the start of the journey, and how did that evolve as you went through the design, the implementation, connecting both the sourcing side of things but also the procurement ops side of things?
So I think that was directed at me. The Clorox team is really very small. So our global strategic sourcing GSS team, it consists of myself, and I kind of manage corporate professional services, R&D, and HR, and we have one person that manages marketing, sales, and another person that does like finance, facilities, and travel. And so we are lined up with the sourcing team, the source to pay team that Mike talked about for several years. And so that's our partnership and our relationship with our stakeholders on the sourcing side, and then kind of flows through to the middle. And then we have the procurement operations team that is supporting kind of the day-to-day pushing those orders through. And Mike's being very kind when he says we're high touch. We are definitely white glove almost. And so it's critical to have the new team understand that and be willing to pick up the phone and walk people through things, share screen. We do that an awful lot. So while we have a lot of job aids and everything out there, we're really focused on that customer service and making sure people just feel like that they're really taken care of. So the organization is really this sourcing team, our global strategic sourcing team, and then the procurement operations team.
So you mentioned that white glove service. I imagine that was deliberate, that as you sought to build a capability, the intention was to build something that was truly customer focused as opposed to, what may be more of a self-serve model. I just wonder some of the considerations that you took in deciding, look, we want this to be white glove.
Well, I think it goes back to our culture, is that we want to, and we talked about what does success look like, and success was going to be people loving the system and adoption of it, using it. And so as with any change, it was huge, and we had our naysayers, and this is more difficult than it was, et cetera. And so really trying to help people to understand the simplicity of it. And once they've done it a couple times, that it was much easier. But it did take that white glove. It did take a lot of meetings and a lot of trainings and being patient. There's days I just shook my head like, how can people not understand that they have to create a purchase order?
Yep.
But we're still working through that, and we just, a smile on our face and get on the phone and talk them through it again. So
And Kelly, I'm going to come to you in a moment to see if we have any questions from folks who are watching. Mike, as you kind of observe the transformation journey that Clorox has been on, has there been anything particular that's stood out to you in terms of that truly drove success, or any hurdles that had to be overcome? Or I'd love to kind of understand as an outsider perspective. I know you talked a little bit about culture and kind of setting the transformation journey up for success, but as Clorox went along that journey, anything particular that stood out for you?
There's probably several things that stood out, but I think one of the things that stood out mostly is their determination to sort of honor the scope that they had taken on. So they were clear about what they wanted to accomplish and moving forward in that way. Now, they just, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to, I think, to pick out sort of one thing. They just really did a great job of understanding their own culture and working through their own timeline so that it didn't, really infringe on a lot of the other things that they had to do as the pandemic was going on. So,
right.
Keeping focused on those priorities was really, I think, something they did so well.
Cathie, how did you manage it with the pandemic? You talked about before that everything had to be remote, so everything was virtual, and everybody's very busy because you're running at 110% as an organization. How did you balance or manage priorities so that you were able to get the focus and the resources that you needed to drive this transformation forward with everything else that's going on, and added to it everybody being remote?
It was exhausting.
Yeah,
yeah, it was back to back to back to back meetings. It was 12-hour days. It was really exhausting because, as you said, Clorox is critical and was a critical supplier during pandemic, and so I support HR, and so I had to jump on the phone and help with. We had to deal with making sure we had employees and how to keep employees healthy, and all of these demands to make sure that we could keep our business going. And then jump back onto these design calls, and they were back to back. I mean, you could hear people making lunch in the background. There wasn't time to do that. So I can just say it was challenging, but rewarding. And because of our culture, and it's always like, do the right thing. So people's wellness was our number one focus. And so if that meant we had to jump off a call because we had to take care of people, we would. And then we'd come back and just stay focused. But because nobody was commuting, we didn't have to worry about booking conference rooms. We didn't have to wait for people to get there. It's like people had nothing better to do but sit in front of their computer, honestly.
Right.
You did have some people that were trying to homeschool their kids in the background and that type of thing, but everyone was really dedicated. I would say, as we stood up the Proc Ops team, was when the COVID-19 hit really hard in India as well. And so we needed to have empathy for what was going on there, trying to run our Proc Ops team on West Coast hours, which is the middle of the night in India. And so really trying to understand and flex, and working with Mike and the Denali team to say, how can we make it work for them and for us? And we were able to come up with some solutions for that.
Yeah, and that was honestly, that was something that really surprised, I think shocked a lot of the folks on our team to see the Clorox sort of come to us and say, how can we make sure that we're doing right by these folks and giving them an opportunity to take care of the things that they need to take care of, because COVID is ravaging them, their communities and their families as well. So just a big thanks to Clorox for being sensitive to that. It sort of made the team feel like part of a family as opposed to contractors.
That's really important too. I've been a part of some of those teams, and regular viewers and listeners to Art of Procurement know I spent a year out in India as well, managing delivery teams as part of outsourced relationships. And making that team feel a part of your broader organization makes such a difference in terms of motivation, performance, because everybody wants to feel like they're part of something and part of a team, and not being an outsourced provider, or, like you say, a contractor or whatever that may be. And for the buying organization to treat your provider like that just makes such a difference. And it doesn't often take a lot. It's just a mindset thing. But I've seen that have such a big impact across a number of different relationships. I'm going to come to Kelly, and I'm going to continue to encourage anybody. If you've got questions related to the Clorox journey at all, please feel free to pop them in the questions. We're also going to talk in a little while about ROI and success factors, and how the journey continues. But Kelly, I'm going to come to you to see if we've got any questions in so far from the audience.
We do, as a matter of fact. And Cathie, you'll be glad, because you said early on that your focus was communication, communication, communication. And our audience is listening because we have some questions about communication. One of the really interesting ones, I think, is when you think about your internal communication effort, what methods or channels did you use internally to indicate that changes were coming, and then to update people as some of the changes took effect? That's a question from Andrea.
Okay, great. We did a multi-prong approach. So people at Clorox are used to using our internal intranet, Clorox Hub, for all their news. So everybody is used to going there every day to find out about changes, announcements, products, whatever's going on in the news for Clorox. And so we use that to say, well, we branded it My Buy. And so it's like, My Buy is coming. What is it? We also use newsletters through email. Normally, when you're rolling out something like this, you would have meetings, you would have brown bags, you would have all of that, but we didn't have any in-person meetings. So we did these meetings with functional leaders. We would do it, hey, invite us to your team meeting and let us tell you about what's coming. So we tried to build some excitement up front. And then we did these newsletters, maybe every 6 weeks or so, and we would just kind of give them little snippets of what was coming. But again, I talked about, we interviewed people at the beginning to what were they currently doing and trying to educate them on how that was going to change. So we would go back to them, and there was the continuous feedback loop. So there was a team that worked on change management and continually trying to talk with people and make sure that they knew we heard them, and this is how we heard them, and this is how we were designing the system. So those three things were really key to having different inputs and getting the information from different sources.
Now, when you think about, you mentioned the newsletters and the intranet and meetings, those things would not necessarily work when trying to have similar communications with the supplier base. And Mike, I'll ask you a little bit about enablement, but before we get to the point of supplier enablement, how were you communicating with suppliers? What was the plan for handling that side of it?
So we did a lot of work around identifying which suppliers we needed to talk with. And we did a couple of webinars for our suppliers, announcing what it was, doing training. We invited, the whole supplier base that we thought might be impacted to participate. But we had to tell our stakeholders too up front, like, encourage your suppliers to attend these meetings because it will affect them. And so again, it was having to communicate with both sides of that. And then you still had suppliers that thought, it doesn't affect me. So we've had to continue that effort of educating suppliers. And we, on our main company website, on our supplier site, where suppliers would go to if they want to find out anything about Clorox, there's training materials and how to register and how to do business with us on the indirect side. But we did do the in-person kind of webinar training for them as well.
And Mike, to look at the enablement side of that, what has been WNS Denali's focus around either continuing the communication process with suppliers or supporting them through understanding what would change or helping them complete those tasks. How would you maybe dig down a level on the idea of enablement to give the audience a sense of where that time is being focused?
Yeah, it's essentially help desk related, and so our team is reaching out to suppliers that for whatever reason either they did not understand about how to go into the tool and to get themselves enabled, and there was an issue and their account sort of stalled in the process. Or it's just reaching out to those that are sort of on the tail side of things and need to be moved onto the system. But it really is a pretty white glove approach to reaching out to those suppliers, helping them to understand how to do the process. And this is either through emails, which that might work, or phone calls, or getting on, and doing sort of screen shares and those kinds of things, and helping them through sort of step by step of the process. But at the end of the day, you're right on. It's so critical that those suppliers are enabled into the system, that we've got a dedicated team that's sort of walking through and sort of holding their hands as needed in order to get them enabled into the system, and trying to make it as easy for them as possible, and being proactive about understanding, okay, well, it looks like this this particular supplier is a bit stalled out in the process. Maybe let's get on the phone, let's call them and see how can we help them to complete the process. So again, it's just a very customer service oriented help desk approach that we've taken to try to be successful in this space.
If I
Now
could add,
oh, of course, Cathie, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to that. With our stakeholders, once they started seeing the simplicity and how easy things, like if they had a purchase order and the invoice would come in matched and they could just approve it, they also championed, and that will get them on the phone with this supplier enablement team and the supplier, and really underscore the importance of being connected and the ease of it. So as a team, it's helped to make some of those efforts a little more successful as well.
And it always helps when everyone is aligned, right? When a procurement operations group and also suppliers and also stakeholders are kind of working through this similarly. And I can't help but wonder, Cathie, you've mentioned culture several times. Mike, you've talked about the specific steps that Denali took to make sure that anybody on your team that was supporting Clorox was also a part of their corporate culture. Were you able to see, as your team worked with those suppliers, Mike, sort of evidence that the Clorox culture had also reached those suppliers and there was a cultural element in that community as well? Right? Did that end up being part of it as you started doing the work?
Yeah, it definitely did. And I think what we see is that, Clorox got a mature supply base, and in a lot of ways, they've been using a lot of their suppliers for some time, and their stakeholders, their business partners, have phenomenal relationships with those suppliers, and it's one of the things that makes them so successful. And so they've sort of bought into the Clorox culture as they've worked with them. And so it does make it quite a bit easier. And obviously, there's some amount of suppliers that are coming and going all the time. And as new suppliers come in, I think even through the process, that our source to contract team uses to get new suppliers in the door, hopefully they get exposed to the culture of Clorox through the process, and they start to see what it will look like for them to be part of the Clorox supplier base. And that just had a huge impact on how things have gone. So, yeah.
So then I think one more question for you, Cathie, and then I'll hand the floor back to Phil, because I know everybody's dying to talk about the ROI of all this. I have a question from Gianna about whether you either have a mandate in place to ensure that all POs and invoices are being processed through the systems and the processes that you moved to from your legacy way, or if you don't have that mandate, what were the discussions like internally about whether a mandate should exist?
So we talk about culture, and Clorox is one of these people that, bring people along for the journey, don't dictate what you're going to do. So we tried the soft approach when we rolled it out. This is coming. We want you to create requisitions and POs, et cetera. And we went live January 19th of this year. And so we were watching, and there were certain people adopting and all of that, but we still had a lot of non-PO backed invoices coming through. So we made the decision to say, you have to have a PO as of May 1st. And so that created a whole bunch of frenzy, and we ended up doing the office hours that Mike talked about, walking people how to do POs. And yet there were still some people that it doesn't apply to me. And so we ran a lot of statistics and looked and identified people that had a lot of non-PO backed invoices. And so then we kind of said, you have to go to this essentials training. If you're approving invoices, you need to have a PO. So we haven't yet gotten to no PO, no pay, but it is something we've talked about. It is something we will probably move towards in another couple of months. But right now, it's still just holding people's hand a little bit harder this time with the mandate of going to training, because we wanted to take away any excuses. I just didn't know it applied to me, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Welcome. And
I see that another question just came in from, I'm going to pronounce this wrong probably, so I apologize in advance, from Mairi, who asked, and it was a really interesting question I wanted to pose. So during the implementation, and I'll pose this to you, Cathie, and then I actually have a question as well for you, Mike. So Cathie, during the implementation, did you experience any challenges with defining roles and responsibilities for P2P task ownership between functions, and specifically procurement and finance? And if you did have any issues in roles and responsibilities and the definition of roles and responsibilities, how did you go about resolving those?
So if I'm getting the question right, this is more on our support team at Clorox or on the procurement operations team?
I think from a procurement operations team, as often you can have procurement and finance who both feel that it's in their realm of responsibility, I guess. And just if you had any challenges between defining, hey, this is something that should sit with finance and this is something that should fit with procurement, or maybe you didn't have those challenges in this implementation.
Well, so one of the things that we had identified, and Mike mentioned this, was to have this help desk, right? So we have like an email box set up internally for people to pose questions to. And the goal was the Proc Ops team is going to man this email box, and that's going to be it. Well, what happened was almost 90% of the questions coming in were invoice related.
Right.
And so we had to have the P2P team. And so what we've decided, and just early on, is that several people manned that email box. So we have the procurement operations team, we had myself, the admin, and then we had folks from our P2P team, our finance team, manning those, because they could get in and look at the invoices where we didn't have access to that on the procurement side. And so although our thought was that we were going to move over that mailbox to the procurement operations team completely, we all agreed we can't do it while there's still a high percentage of invoice questions coming in. And it has, now that we're getting more PO-backed invoices, we're seeing a decline finally in the invoice questions coming in. So we're again we're in it to win it kind of thing. And so our P2P team and our procurement team have worked very closely together, and there hasn't really been any kind of finger pointing. We all hand off and help each other, and including the people that man the vendor master, keeping that updated and making sure we have the right suppliers connected to the system. So all three teams work very closely together.
And that's great, because
from the question.
Because from a stakeholder perspective, one of the challenges is they see these handoffs and they're not sure whether to go to procurement or whether to go to finance or AP or whoever. And oftentimes they think, well, it's related to my supplier, so it must be a procurement issue. Then you're having to manage that. And so the fact that you've got everybody kind of who has the that can see what's going on, that can see can jump in when it's an invoice problem or whatever. To a stakeholder, it feels a lot more seamless. So there's a lot less waiting around, I'm sure, and it probably goes to that customer experience, more of a seamless customer experience that you're hoping to achieve.
But just to pipe in just for a second, that was actually something that Clorox did a really, really good job of up front, is identifying that we're going to have these handoffs, and we're going to know, we know that this is coming. And so we're pretty intentional about building those connections up front, using ServiceNow. How are we going to route something that came to us, but it's not really for us? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to move that onto the right place so that the customer, the business owner, doesn't feel like I'm just being passed around from person to person? So yeah, Clorox was really intentional, did a great job on that too.
And there's a question from Sherry, which I think you answered already, indirectly. Who does accounts payable team report to? Who does sourcing report to? So by the sounds of it, accounts payable reports up through finance, and then sourcing up through procurement.
Right, into product supply is where our procurement organization reports to, yeah.
And the question, Mike, that I had for you, and then I'm going to go into a couple of questions on ROI. And I felt it's probably fairer to ask you this question, Mike, than it is to Cathie, because it's around selecting technologies. We know we've talked a lot about tools being really important. And I don't want to put Cathie on the spot to say, hey, what were you looking for? What was most important in your technology selection journey? So I want to ask a little bit more generally, Mike, from your perspective, when you're working with organizations like Clorox, what are you advising them in terms of what are the considerations they should be taking into account when determining which is the right technology approach for them when you're going on a transformation like this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, that I mentioned it earlier, is that it's got to be right for your organization. There are lots of bleeding edge tools that are out there that you can go with. But is the culture of your organization bleeding edge? And if not, then that's just not really a great recipe for success. So what we found is that if you understand your culture and the people that are going to be your main users, and you get a good understanding of them, and then you match that technology to your situation, obviously it's got to reach your goals, and obviously there's going to be change and that sort of thing. But if you can find something that sort of matches sort of who you are already to some extent, that seems like it's really where the most success comes from. And I think Clorox has found that. There are lots of different options for them as they thought through this particular technology transformation effort. And the tool that they selected, it on the one hand, it does really match their culture. It's got a simple interface. It's easy to use. It's easy for people to learn. It's effective and very, very functional. And it does a great job. And the people have embraced it as a result. So I think that's one of the things that's really key, is making sure that does that technology sort of match who you are as a company.
I want to pile on that a little bit, because the tool selection was a challenge, because our IT department actually preferred a different tool. And so there was a little bit of arm wrestling at the top between IT and the procurement, because we said it has to be something that our people will adopt and use, and that's more important. And there was a fear, if we couldn't get IT on board, then they were going to find all kinds of problems with the system. It doesn't work because you picked the other one. But we finally got everybody, and our executive team, our steering committee, basically said, you guys go away and make a decision and then come back. Don't have us make the decision. So it was really based on, we had to pick the solution that best matched to our people and needs.
And so it sounds like that user adoption was critical then to that, which again is kind of refreshing to hear, because that sometimes gets missed with, we as procurement folks can look at features and, kind of get tied up a little bit in, well, it does all these wonderful things and look at all this data that it's going to give me access to. But if it's a tool that's not actually usable, you're not going to get that data anyway, because no one's going to adopt it. And then, 2 years down the line, you're kind of looking at a big investment that didn't necessarily pay the ROI that you were hoping to.
Yeah, correct.
Now we're now in September, so you're 9 months into the journey. You said earlier you went live, I think it was January the 19th. How, since you've gone live, have you put in place some infrastructure? I don't know whether it's governance or oversight or what it looks like, to ensure that there's a feedback loop, so that you can you can see what's working, what's not working. You can get feedback from stakeholders, how to make improvements, make adjustments. How are you managing that now that you're a few months post go live?
So we continue to have that email box where people can put suggestions. We've also created some forms in the tool where they think maybe we can add a catalog. Again, the better the usability of the tool is, the more people will adopt and use it. So we're really asking for their input to help make it better. You know, as far as governance, I talked a little bit about the fact that we ran reports and could identify people that weren't using the system. So we went out after them. We notified their managers, like, we're making these people go to training, and that I would say that didn't go over too well. People weren't happy about that, but it's kind of those last people to get over the line. Yeah, I'm not sure if I really answered your total question on that one, though. So,
I mean, I'm really just thinking, and you talked a little bit about some of the things that you did to drive adoption, which is really what it's all about, you know, because you're only going to get the adoption if you've identified challenges or things that didn't work as you wanted them to, or adjustments that you can make. You're kind of identifying those and adopting, understanding what they are, and then driving them into the change kind of process.
Yes, and so we've also started kind of a pipeline list, like this would be a good improvement, this would be a good improvement, and trying to prioritize those. Some of those are things that our team, just the admin, can do on programming and the tools. Some of them require IT intervention, and so we're getting those mapped over to them so that they can put it in their pipeline of projects as well, and just continuing to expand. We are looking to, once we hit our year mark, really be able to pull some spend analytics out of it. We just never had that visibility because we could pull invoices, but a lot of the invoices just were high level spend, and you couldn't really tell what we were buying. So we're super excited to try to get more data behind it, and then really looking at you know, supplier rationalization, cost savings opportunities. You know, I think Denali, as our sourcing partner too, we're just like, yay, we're going to have some spend visibility. So
yeah, data, yes.
Yeah.
And is that part of what success looks like? You know, as you think about, there's obviously a number of different reasons why you would embark on a journey like this, but as you look back, you know, 9 months in and you're 9 months post go live, how is success measured? And, you know, does that differ how success is measured more broadly in the organization versus you as a procurement function looking at, you know, has this transformation been a success or not? Or is it on the way to being a success?
Nothing makes me happier than to be on the phone with a stakeholder and realize that, like, if they create a PO, how easy it's going to be for them to approve an invoice every month on these things. And people are like, oh my gosh, you have no idea how many hours I was spending coding these invoices or validating this. So that to us is success. When we have more efficient processes, we're changing the way we work. We're open to those changes, and so that's the biggest success. And then I think that the fallout will be, like I said, data, spend analytics, and being able to build up and beef up some of those supplier relationships we have. Maybe we didn't know we had 15 suppliers doing the same thing, and now we'll identify that.
And Kelly, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, just see if we've got any last questions that have come in. Mike, from your perspective, how do you coach organizations like Clorox on success factors when you're going through a journey, especially when you're early in the journey? Because what success may look like in 2 years' time may look very different than what success looks like 9 months in, but it's important to kind of have those goalposts so that you know that you're going in the right direction, you know, in the early days of transformation.
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to, why are you doing this to begin with? Right. Yeah. And keeping that in front and center. And you know, these projects are long and they're complicated, and they involve many people, and they involve many small choices along the way, but you're always sort of driving toward that main goal, the main reason why you did this to begin with. And going back to that, on a regular basis, it does sort of help you understand, like, okay, we have reached some level of success. And then from there, it's a matter of not necessarily looking for that next larger goalpost, but rather, what are those smaller incremental improvements that you can make that you didn't perhaps see or you didn't realize would be available when you started the project, because you're looking at this big goal and this big sort of, you know, the really high level thing that you wanted to achieve. And so now you're thinking about, well, yeah, because we have this information, we can do X, Y, Z. I think the other thing is that your goals will be modified by constant communication and regular communication with your stakeholders and those people that are using it. So staying in touch with them. So like as Cathie has further conversations with people about, gosh, it would be great if it did X, Y, Z. Oh gosh, you know what? That's a great idea. We didn't necessarily think about that to begin with, but now your user base is, you know, Clorox has 8,800 people, and so you've got that many more ideas for how you can continue to improve things. So it is a journey, but I mean, you know, Clorox definitely has kept their eye on the prize in terms of their main goal, and then many other sub goals will come along as you continue to refine and improve along the way.
Yeah, one of the benefits of a program like this is actually changing the perception of procurement, because a lot of times the perception of procurement from a user base, from a stakeholder base, is based on how easy it is for them to order the things that they need every day, the simple things. You know, and when it's a difficult process, or there isn't a process, the technology is clunky, or there's no technology, then that can have a negative impact on how the organization sees procurement. You fix that, and all of a sudden you're seen as that strategic advisor that ultimately we want to be, because you're not making it easier to do the things that the stakeholders want to do on a daily basis, and they start to look at you in a different way.
Yeah, they have jobs to do, and it's not, you know, their job isn't to be a full-time procurement person, and shouldn't take, you know, days and days to work through the process. That's why we're here.
Kelly, I want to come to you, just see if there's any last questions that we've received from the audience today before if we have time, I'll go into one last question and then wrap up.
Sure, we've actually received a ton of questions, so thank you for that. I think in terms of the time that we have, the question that I'd like to end with, Cathie, this question comes from Mary. We've talked about a little bit your professional journey that landed you in this transformation lead role, and now you've been through coming up on a year of leading the transformation itself. How has your role changed as the way procurement operates has changed? And is there anything that you'd like to share or that you're looking towards as you look towards the future in terms of how your role may continue to change?
It's funny that you should ask, because I'm actually having that conversation with my manager right now. Like, what's the future of Cathie look like? Because I've been doing procurement for so many years, this has been an exciting role to do, and I'm finding that I'm loving training and change management and trying to figure out how the company can do it even better next time and have less people left behind, as far as like, oh, it applies to me, like, how did we miss that? So we're talking about that right now. Right now I'm still overseeing those areas of procurement, still working very closely with my Denali lead on that, but trying to see, as we expand this tool and the usability and start driving some key benefits out of it, if it's something, you know, a new role that should kind of be created to manage that, versus kind of stepping back into the procurement role day to day.
Thank you, Cathie, and thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Kelly. So my last question, we have a minute, so I'm going to pose it very quickly to you both, and I'm going to pick on Mike first, so that Cathie gets the extra 30 seconds to think about it. So Mike, putting you on the spot. Now, I really just want to know, and you've already talked a lot about success factors, but if there's really something you want to reiterate to the audience today about what drove success to this point in the journey for Clorox, what would it be?
Yeah, it's, you know your audience, know your stakeholders, know your users that you're trying to impact by this, and then do something with that information. You know, it's not just enough to know them. You have to incorporate that into how you're going to implement in your particular framework.
Thanks, Mike. And Cathie, same question to you.
I would say understand that this is a huge change, and people typically are scared of change. And so communicate, and feedback, understand. It's really being a partner with your end users and make sure that they understand. And so,
don't do this in a bubble.
Exactly. Get out there, talk is what I'd have to say. Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Kelly, thank you for being the voice of our audience and jumping in with some questions that we received. And thank you, everybody who submitted questions to us today. Mike and Cathie, I want to thank you so much for being our guests, for being on the spot and answering all the questions that both I had and the audience had. So I appreciate everybody's time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.